Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. I'm going to call the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization UPWP committee meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: web content accessibility guidelines 2.1 level AA standards and revised section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodation in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Kate White, MPO staff at kwhite@ctps.org or 857-702-3658. So let's see, Sandy, what do we typically do? Do I call roll? Do we do a roll call or do
Yeah, so you would call roll based on the roll call spreadsheet that I sent you.
Okay. Let me pull that up. Okay, let's see. Is Daniel Amstutz here from Arlington? Is Jim Fitzgerald here or Tom Kadzis from Boston?
Yeah, Kadzis here from Boston representing Mayor Janey.
Okay. Is Thatcher Keyser here from Framingham? Or Eric Johnson? Do we have Peter Pelletier from Midway? Or Tom Holder? Okay. Do we have David Kosis or Nicole Friedman from Newton?
David is not going to be able to make it today. He'll let me know that.
Okay. Do we have Tom O'Rourke?
Yeah, hi, Tom O'Rourke from Norwood, and I apologize. I'm going to have to leave at 1 o'clock.
Okay. Do we have Tom Bent or Brad Rawson from Somerville?
Tom Bent, it's here, City of Somerville.
Thank you. I heard Len Diggins.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Great. Do we do other introductions or should we move on to the agenda?
Typically, we just have the members of the committee. But for anybody who's here, if you can rename yourself with your affiliation and your Zoom name, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think the next thing on the agenda is public comment. Does anyone wish to make a public comment? Let's see. Matthew Peter.
Hi, yeah, this is Matthew Peterson with Transit Matters. I'm just here to note that I'm here in support of the bus electrification study that we proposed along with many other advocacy groups and municipalities. And I'm just here to answer any questions should they come up.
Great, okay, thank you. Yeah, well, Michelle, go ahead.
Good afternoon, folks. Representative Michelle Socolo here to similarly answer any questions that might arise on Project T10, which is the Innovative Transportation Financing Solutions. And I will stay here for as long as you need me. And I'm just also curious, Sandy, if you were able to distribute the proposal that, oh, I see it in the chat, sorry. Yes, members have the study concept in your materials somewhere.
Yes, he did send that out, so we do have that. Thank you.
I sent that out an email after the last meeting, so if you need to go back and look for it, that's where it is, folks.
Okay, I don't see any other public comments. So do we want to go on to agenda item 3, which is a summary of the March 4th meeting?
And I just let Eric Johnson from Framingham into the Zoom.
Okay, great. Let's see, can we have a motion to approve the meeting summary?
Eric, I'll make that motion.
Great. Can I get a second? Tom O'Rourke?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Great. Sandy, what do we typically do in UPWP? Do we do a roll call?
Yes, but it's quick.
Okay. So I'm going to, so if all the members can raise their hand, I'll do a quick roll call. Tom Kadzis,
Yes.
Len Diggins,
Yes.
Tom O'Rourke,
Yes.
Eric Johnson.
Abstain.
Okay. Tom Bent.
Yes.
And I also vote yes. I think that's all the members that are present. Okay, thank you all. That motion passed. And let's go on to agenda item 4, which is the summary of the March 25th meeting. So can I also get a motion to accept that meeting summary? Tom Kadzis.
I make a motion to accept.
Thank you. Tom O'Rourke.
Second that.
Great. Let's do a quick roll call on that one, if members can raise their hand. Tom Bent.
Yes.
Thank you. Tom Kadzis.
Yes.
Len Diggins.
Yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Yes.
Eric Johnson.
Yes.
And I also vote yes on that. So that motion also passed. So great. Let's now go to the meat of the agenda, which is to discuss the federal fiscal year 2022 universe of proposed studies. So Sandy, should I turn it over to you?
Yes, absolutely. So just a little bit of introduction. This is continuing the discussion that the committee started at the most recent meeting, March 25th. We're going to go through the UPWP universe, and various staff members will speak about different study concepts that are in the universe. The goal of this meeting is not to make decisions. It's to allow the committee to ask kind of factual questions and get more familiar with these study ideas. We will schedule a meeting. We'll talk at the end of the meeting about the next meeting, but we'll probably be scheduling a meeting for May 6th to try and make some of those final decisions about what studies to go forward with in the 2022 UPWP. And of course, I will, as usual, be sending out a survey to committee members as well as to staff between those two meetings. So what we will do is in a moment is I will share my screen and we can discuss, we can kind of just march through the universe and have different people speak at different items. I would suggest, if the chair is okay with this, that we start with study T10, the innovative transit financing, since Representative Chicolo is here. And so that we don't take up more of her valuable time, that we just go ahead with any questions that folks have for her right now, and then start from the top. So I'm going to share my screen. 1 second. All right. Can you all see that?
You can see it, Sandy.
All right. So you should be able to see study concept T10 in 1 second. I'm gonna slide down, there you go. And I will zoom in a little bit since we're discussing specifically that one. And if anybody else, if somebody could put the link to the UPWP universe from the meeting calendar in the chat, that would be fantastic. All right, so Mr. Chair, if you'd like to call on folks as they raise their hands, I actually can't see the hand raising at the moment.
Len Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is perhaps to you, Sandy. Would this be something that could be funded through community connections?
So this is a study. Community Connections is for capital funding and can't
Right.
fund planning work.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that clarification. Thanks. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions about this one, T10? Michelle, do you want to say anything?
Thank you, Eric. I think it might be helpful just to describe the project a little bit more and the genesis of why I think it's needed. Transit improvement districts is a concept that we're trying to advance both legislatively as well as sort of as a policy approach, potentially for MassDOT to follow in the future. Because I think what we see a lot of times is much of the grant funding that gets provided for small shuttle buses to start up is incentive money, but often results in shuttles that stumble because they don't have a permanent ongoing financing mechanism in place. And so, in order to avoid having a situation where we catalyze a lot of really good ideas, but that don't end up lasting over an established period of time, I firmly believe that we need to use a different approach to how we start these shuttles with the planning up front. And so the idea came from observing a number of routes that I've seen in the suburbs, that some of which have gotten off the ground effectively and others which have failed, and trying to help us follow some models that will be, will avoid the pitfalls and allow for, these shuttles to really flourish. So I will say that the concept that I sent out includes really looking at all of the models, looking at some national models, but then also looking at what's been successful in Massachusetts, and actually talking with the RTAs and the TMAs and other private shuttle haulers, such as universities and institutions, hospital institutions that are running private shuttles, to see what they have done successfully and where the financing has been able to be more permanent, including looking at governance structures, because I think that's important. How are the decisions made, and then how can these shuttles ensure that they're really meeting the needs of the riders? So I don't think it would be a terribly expensive study, but I also think, I just wanted to comment that when I looked at the project evaluation score, the proposed score, I actually think that it was ranked a little low in the category of equity. I think equity should be much, much higher because from my experience, these shuttle buses are often used by the most vulnerable of riders, the ones who don't have access to cars, the ones who may have a disability. The first mile, last mile shuttle bus is really often for the worker that doesn't have any other options. So this is supposed to be statewide, and if we can get the model to work, I believe that we'll be able to establish buses in some of our most remote locations in rural places, but also in our urban core where the existing bus network is not adequate. With a better financing model, we would be able to catalyze an awful lot of new services. And just conceptually, just for, again, some background about why I feel so strongly about this. I have a district that has 4 major highways that ring my district, but we also, interestingly, have access to 7 commuter rail stations or rapid transit within 10 minutes of every corner of my district. And yet most of us in this district do not take transit because there's no ground transportation. And once you're in your car, you continue to proceed into Boston or wherever, polluting the highways and congesting them. But also there's no parking at various train stations. And this solves that in an excellent way. I do believe if we're going to get to our Global Warming Solution Act required goals, are getting to net zero by 2050, that these feeder services are going to become a vital and essential part of our system. And without these types of services, we simply won't get the ridership on the commuter rails that we're going to need to see to actually achieve our climate goals. So it may seem like a small idea, but I think it's vitally critical that we figure out how to finance these systems and how to provide incentive money and a way to coordinate between the state, the municipality, and the private sector, which is what we're not seeing now, is that real collaborative approach where all the parties that have a stakehold in this, including the riders, especially the riders, are at the table in designing our future transit systems. So hopefully that makes some sense. Hopefully, Sandy, I don't know if people need to see the study again, if you could pull it up on your screen. I put a lot of detail into it, and I'm certainly open to the MPO and the UPWP, refining the study concept further, because when I wrote the concept, I didn't know entirely if some of these items had already been done, if the data exists elsewhere, and obviously I wouldn't want to duplicate any work that's already been done. But I think it's an exciting opportunity to really move us forward in Massachusetts.
Great. Michelle, thank you for that context. Tom, do you have a question?
Yeah, I did have a question for the representative. I think this is a terrific idea. I fully support it. I know you spoke to us before a little bit about it, and did you mention anything about there being some additional legislation that you were filing related to this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I do have legislation exactly so to catalyze this, but in the process of, I filed the legislation last session and then refiled it again this session. And Cindy Friedman on the Senate side has filed it as well. And Lexington is actually seeking a home rule petition. And we're working with some potential other communities that might seek a home rule to be able to pilot transit improvement districts. And essentially the concept that I have working right now is that it would be like a business improvement district, and the private property owners would fund 25% as a minimum of the new costs, as would the municipality. But the state would also throw in that same amount of funding on a permanent basis, for these shuttle buses, which would have to be 3-year minimum services and a maximum of 6 before they get sunsetted and reauthorized. But we still have a lot of pieces of the puzzle that this study would help us understand in terms of the actual likelihood of the demand, as well as I'm really intrigued to know what kind of private shuttles are out there that we could potentially convert to public shuttles. I've been on, in my prior history, I was on the planning board in Lexington, I was on the select board, and I was often appalled by, the transportation demand management concessions we were able to get from developers. The money would go into a pot of, and then not really be spent in a way that was meaningful to actually do TDM, or the developer would create a shuttle, but not let the local neighborhoods access it. And that was always a very backwards problem where they weren't really filling their shuttle to its capacity, and those most impacted by a new development weren't able to see any relief by being able to use these shuttles. And I think we really have it backwards. We really need to make sure that if we're going to require TDM, that the TDM projects become public. And this is a way, potentially, if we understand the universe of systems out there, the private haulers, the universities, the hospitals, what are they providing today? If we have a better sense of how many services they're offering, that will also identify for us where there are gaps. I'd really like to see us, through a study like this, identify the nodes where we have commuter rail, where we don't have any ground transportation to that commuter rail. So we have sort of an obvious catchment area for a future shuttle bus, and really understand that, and perhaps have a mapping effort to identify the greatest opportunities for these shuttle buses. I think that would be one of the data points that would be enormously helpful, as well as looking at the financing and governance models that have been successful, where the private sector has collaborated with municipalities and with the public sector.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Kansas.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to agree with my colleague from Norwood. I think it's a great idea for all the reasons the representative mentioned. I won't go into it to save time.
Hi, it's Michelle. Valerie got.
Oh, there we go.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you. Betsy.
Thanks, Eric. I just wanted to respond or just mention something that the representative brought up about identifying gaps between different services in our region, different both RTA and local shuttle services. Every year, every 4 years, the MPO, all the MPOs in the state do a coordinated public transit human services transportation plan that identifies all of those services in the region. It's for grant applicants for the state's 5310 program, but it might be of interest to representative or others interested in looking at kind of the lay of the land that exists already in terms of where these services are. So I just wanted to point that out if that may be of interest. And I'll put a link in the chat so that you can see that document.
Great. Thank you, Betsy. Len, did you want to add another point?
Yeah, well, thanks for mentioning that, Betsy, because I mean that's a great study. I became aware of it, or plan. I became aware of that last cycle, and I'm really impressed by it. And look, I think this is good too, but it is coming in at 80K, and my sense is that we have about maybe 200, 300K to spend. And I'm happy the representative is here because I'm kind of curious as to whether you have some sense of what's going on with the Transportation Climate Initiative, because that's a big deal, and I think it's going to provide a lot of potential funding. And you said this is a statewide initiative. So, any sense of how that's coming along and whether that might be a source of funds or something like this?
Thank you, Leonard. That's a great question. I know that Mass is a part of the TCI and that is expected to start generating some funds, but I don't think that money will be available for another year or two, and it's unclear exactly how the funds will be spent. But I should mention that this study was actually authorized in the recent transportation bond bill, and it is incorporated within the secretary's line item for studies that shall be conducted, and there's a $3 billion authorization for bonding there that could be used for this study. So the wording of the study said something to the effect of the secretary shall conduct a transit improvement district study. And so that's part of, one of the opportunities that we could to pursue some additional funding or avenues for funding so that wouldn't have to go directly through the PWP. But I'm a little less clear of the different possibilities, what would be the most appropriate way to advance that.
Okay. Well, that's encouraging because as you know, CDPS is happy to do studies that someone else will pay them to do. So yeah, we can look into that. So I support the study and the concept completely. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Representative Sokolow while she's here? Okay. Not seeing any. Thank you very much. Michelle, feel free to stick around if you want to hear the rest of the conversation. We're not making any decisions today. We're just really getting information about all the studies. But thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
And thank you all. I really most appreciative that you took me out of order. That really helps me with my time management. So very generous of you, and I was glad to be here today. Thanks.
Great. Okay, Sandy, do you want to go back up to the beginning? Now, were you planning to go through them one at a time, or were you looking to just get questions from folks?
Typically what we've done is go through them one at a time, and
Okay.
we have staff people lined up to speak very briefly to each one. We're already at 12:40, so let's try and go through this quickly. But we'll start with A1, and I think Ariel Patterson is going to speak to that. Before we start, I want to mention one thing about the LRTP goals grid on the right side of the universe there. That's not really intended to be used as a score. Just keep in mind for the studies, it's really about how directly relevant they are to the goals for the MPO that are laid out in the LRTP. That being said, the part of the purpose of the UPWP is to help shape the future of those goals. So if something isn't directly relevant to the LRTP goals or not as highly relevant as another concept, that may be indicating that we need to update the goals, not that it's necessarily a bad study concept. So just something to keep in mind, that it's not, that grid isn't to be used directly as a score. All right, so Ariel, would you like to take it away with study A1?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ariel Patterson, Transportation Planner at PTPS, here to talk briefly about the FY22 Infrastructure Bank and Tactical Outreach Project. Today, I'm going to describe this project as we initially conceived it during the UPWP study idea development process beginning in October 2020. The project under consideration integrates an infrastructure bank, a technical assistance program, and outreach work for municipalities in the MPO region. To create an infrastructure bank, the MPO would purchase materials such as traffic cones, flex posts, and street furniture to loan to communities to test new street configurations for pilot or pop-up projects. MPO staff We'll measure the program's effects and engage community members, potentially conducting a series of workshops in which the MPO partners with municipalities to do outreach and participating communities. It would be fitting for the MPO because of our regional reach, our ability to work with municipal staff, our support of multimodal transportation projects, and our outreach mission. Given the success of recent programs for quick build transportation pilot projects like MassDOT's Shared Streets and Spaces grant program, we anticipate a similarly high demand from municipalities for these low-cost materials. Note that this would be a scalable project. If MPO funding cannot be used to purchase all materials, we could potentially explore external grants through foundations in partnership with MAPC. Now, all that being said, the projects we currently have in mind will more likely resemble a feasibility study than a project of this magnitude. As we've done with other UPWP studies in the past, we want to take an initial look at what it takes to create a successful program before diving in headfirst. A feasibility study will get us started on the project and would include things like reaching out to potential partners to secure storage space for materials and initiate the grant application process for alternate funding. The estimated budget for the FY22 Infrastructure Bank and Tactical Outreach Project is $100,000. However, this estimate was extremely preliminary and it does include physical materials. The potential feasibility study we now have in mind would be a much smaller budget up for discussion. Thank you for your time.
Any questions about that proposal? Daniel Amstutz?
Hi, thanks. Now I can unmute myself. Yeah, I mean, I like the idea, and I think it does make more sense as a feasibility type of study. But I think you do have, I mean, I think of basic logistical issues of, yeah, storage and transfer and how long somebody would have it, you know, sort of basic programmatic elements. I guess I would also say, you know, I think some communities, I don't know. I mean, these materials are not terribly expensive. I mean, I think communities, it wouldn't be that difficult for communities to acquire them, but it's maybe more a matter of how they're used and what are the good situations where they're used. And I mean, I think for some communities, it's just a matter of getting comfortable with the fact that that you could use them, because there's, you know, concerns over safety and maintenance, you know, removing or replacing things. So I think maybe, I don't know, I think maybe more of a technical assistance might make more sense, because you will run into the logistical issues of just sort of moving materials around. So that's my thought. Thanks.
Len Diggins?
So how much is it going to cost?
It says 100,000.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, but Ms. Patterson said that it would cost less initially to do this.
The idea is that the estimate for a feasibility study, which would be the fiscal year 22 activity, is much lower. It's in the range of $20,000 to $30,000.
Okay.
Then there would have to be a future year in which that would involve buying materials, and that would be more expensive. But we'd be exploring some grant funding or other external funding to actually purchase the materials.
Right. So then we're only committing to potentially 23K for this cycle.
That would be correct, yeah.
Okay, great. Because I mean that's a big difference between that and 100K. I mean, and I'm all for the feasibility. And I'll admit, and part of the reason I was asking the question I did earlier about whether this study, the study that the representative wanted done, could be done through community connections, is that when we were discussing the community connections program in the last MPO meeting, the chair said something about that the MassDOT was kind of handling some of the overhead stuff that the Community Connections Project were having. And also we paused what we were going to fund because we wanted to understand how we can make sure these programs would keep going. And you had said that, well, part of approving the study, part of the scoring was determining how feasible it was for the project to keep going, the viability of the project. So I guess what I'm getting at here is, to what extent is MassDOT doing things like this already, or is it in a better position to do it?
Yeah, so that would be part of the engagement that we do before we even scope the study. Like, especially between now and the next UPWP committee meeting, part of what staff does is go to our partners and say, are you working on something similar enough to this that we shouldn't proceed with our work?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Len. Are there any other questions about this one? Seeing none. Oh, Tom Bent.
Sorry, Eric, I just thought of something. So, I know we like this program. One of the things, though, I think that would be important is I know Somerville has used a lot of these different, different traffic calming things and all different materials. So I know we have a pretty good idea of some of the things that work really well in an urban setting and what doesn't work well. So I think one of the key points of this would be information being shared among communities as to what works, what doesn't. So and I'm not sure if it's actually in the text here anywhere. I didn't notice it, but I would, that would just be one thing I think would be very valuable. So that, something that we spent money on and found out, boy, this does not work in an urban setting. You don't even want to talk about it. I think would be helpful for everybody.
Tom, thank you for that point. Actually, that's a really good point, and I would second that one. And I do know that there's another study that's being proposed that's talking about sort of evaluating the shared streets program and kind of learning from that. And a lot of the shared streets efforts were basically similar things about using low cost materials for traffic calming and making streets safer. So there could be the potential to have some synergy there about kind of doing some learning about what are the materials that are most successful. MAPC, we ran into an issue in trying to help municipalities around like procuring materials too. There were some procurement issues. So there might be some synergy between these two bodies of work, kind of understanding materials, and then the next step would be around actually seeking to purchase them. But I would second what Tom said. Tom Kadzis.
Thanks, Eric. I'll just be a little bit of a gadfly in this one. I think it's a good idea. I think that Tom brings up a good point that you're going to have municipalities that are engaged in this. Somerville, Boston, other municipalities, they're engaged in it. My question would be, and there's no answer for this, is there seems to do something like this, there has to be things have to align within the community, and they either do or they don't. And all I'm saying is I'd hate to be wasting time going down a path where there's not the willpower or the risk taking in a community to do this. And I'll leave it at that. I'm not saying that we can't help bring the horse to the water. I'm just saying, depending upon the cost of it, I think the concept stuff, what works, what doesn't make sense. As far as the materials, I'm not too sure. But my biggest issue was just that there are municipalities who are in this whole hog, and they would not be customers for this, I would guess. So who would be your customers? What's your typical municipality? And I'm not expecting an answer. I'm just sort of bringing that up in a rhetorical way, unless you want to talk about it. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Any other comments on this one? So seeing none, Sandy, do we want to go on to the next one?
Yes, I think we should. In fact, you already previewed it, Eric.
Great.
All right, so that's the Healthy Streets Look Back. And this one was proposed by MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning. Ben Mueller was unfortunately not able to be here today, but he did leave Eric and I a note about how they feel about this project. Eric, would you like me to read that?
Yes, please.
All right. It says, this proposed project would review shared streets, healthy streets, interim plazas, and other tactical projects implemented during the pandemic. Work would be performed through interviews with MassDOT shared streets teams and municipal implementing partners. Would also involve reviewing tactical urbanism guides and interim plaza guides for transferable lessons from other regions. A result guidebook would inform future municipal implementations, applications to ongoing shared streets programs anticipated from MassDOT and other states and regional partners. And then he makes the same point that Eric made a moment ago, that this could have synergy with the infrastructure bank idea.
Daniel Amstutz.
Yeah, so I agree with Eric with I guess the note from Ben. Yes, definitely this A1 and A2 make a lot of sense together, or understanding what happened, or how communities used materials through the shared streets program. So that makes a lot of sense. I will add that I think there's a lot of information that could be gleaned simply from MassDOT has asked for, because we did some in Arlington, and they asked for follow-up information about the project and how it went, and sort of like a download a little bit of what was going on with them. So I think that you could glean quite a lot of information simply from looking at the sort of surveys that they sent out to all the communities to ask for like a before and after, like how things went. So this is a ready-made area to start looking and maybe pull out some conclusions from there.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Any other comments or questions about this proposal? Okay, seeing none. Thank you. Let's go on to A3.
All right, and I think most of what there is to say about this one is in the universe, but Michelle Scott is here to maybe speak to it a little bit and answer any questions that you might have.
Do you want me to say anything now, Sandy?
If you have anything to say.
No, like Sandy said, the description captures a lot of it. One thing I'm hoping that we could leverage as part of this study is that we've, built up relationships over the past several years with other MPOs through the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, or AMPO, runs a performance working group. So one thing we could do as part of this study is work through the other MPOs to participate on that, to see, what their experience has been, if any, for adopting Vision Zero policies at the MPO level. There's also some case studies available through the Vision Zero network, who provide some guidance for MPOs on this topic, and we could use those as a jumping off point to look into this issue further. And again, happy to take any questions.
Len Diggins.
Yes, thank you. So, excuse me. So as you know, Michelle, I have delved into this state highway safety plan. And as I said to you, that is one big Vision Zero plan. And I think it's the very, very pragmatic approach to getting to zero and understanding the limitations to that. So it seems like the state's done a lot of work and a lot of planning. I think a lot of the local groups, they have this notion that we can get to zero probably a lot sooner than we really can. So my point is, like, can we use what the state has done already to help inform the MPOs and municipalities about what can really be done and what the state's already doing, so that they're not trying to duplicate the effort that the state's doing?
I guess what I would say, and this research would probably be more geared to how we could best carve out a niche in the state's process, or best support them in some of these things. We talk kind of broadly with the Highway Safety Division folks, but it might be helpful to see, just examples from other parts of the country where MPOs have kind of fit themselves in to advance some of the state level Vision Zero goals that different states have put forth. So this will be a little bit less about kind of like duplicating what the state would do, and more about like finding our position and the best ways we could help. Hopefully that answers your question.
I see what you're getting at. So 60K, huh? All right, thank you.
And we'll be revising those budget estimates as well over the next couple of weeks before we come back with a staff recommended list. it's
Okay.
all very preliminary at this point.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on A3? Okay, seeing none, then let's go to the land use and environment and economy ones. So L1.
All right, I'm going to talk about L1 and L2 together a little bit because these are very similar and we should try and start speeding up a little bit. These are both follow-ups to previous work that has been done or is being done. The follow-up work on trip generation, the study that I worked on, along with Ariel over last year, and the one that Droshte is working on currently. And we don't know exactly what the follow-up to that would be in terms of content, but we know there's a lot of interest in the topic around, including around parking, and that we'd allocate some amount of money to following up on that based on the outcomes of Droshte's research in particular. L2, similarly, we have the ongoing task this year, 2021, for travel demand management. We hosted the one forum together with MEPC. We'll be hosting another one later in the year. And we're trying to get a handle on what regional interest is in regional TDM activities. So that still also lacks definition, but there's definitely energy and interest in the broad topic in the region. So both of these would be relatively small and potentially scalable efforts.
Okay, any questions on these two? I'll just put a plug in and say, you know, they're important topics that come up, you know, time and again. So I know, you know, there's a lot in front of us, but, you know, these are important ones and ones too. So Sandy, you want to go on to L3?
Well, let's do it. All right, I think Annette was going to speak to that briefly.
Sure. So this is kind of a task order type thing where we found out, you know, during COVID, there were a lot of things that came up that we weren't able to respond to because we didn't have the funding available. So this would just put aside a pot of funding for us to provide technical assistance to the municipalities for anything that comes up in terms of COVID recovery. And, you know, it could, you know, some of the things that we're learning through some of the projects like Future of the Curb and CBDs, we are looking at how people responded to COVID in those particular areas. So we could use that expertise or some, you know, transit planning assistance outside of the regular regional transit service planning assistance that we do, more focused on recovery from COVID.
Thank you, Annette. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, let's keep going.
All right, L4 is me again. So there's a lot of energy around freight and logistics and trying to cope, especially with the emergence of e-commerce. And we have the swap study that the committee heard about at the last meeting. This study would be looking at the mode share and how the history of freight transferring from rail to road and potential local or regional strategies for trying to reverse some of that trend and move freight from truck to rail as a safety and environmental measure. It could be, there's a lot of different moving parts to this. It could be scalable in any number of different directions, from just research to working with one town to talk about strategies to trying to pilot a region-wide initiative or research effort, and also has some obvious connections to the swap study that's been connected and some of those e-commerce things that MEPC has been working on as well.
Thank you, Sandy. Any questions on this? Okay, seeing none. Did you also mention the next one as M2 as a part of that, or
no?
You're seeing those as separate bodies of work. Yes.
Yeah. So that was L4.
I'm sorry.
And then M1 through M3 are what we call the recurring studies. These are the ones that Mark Abbott's group does. The sub-regional priority roadways and corridors from the needs assessment happen every year. Safety and operations and selected intersections happens every other year, and typically the committee just does not debate these, and we include them in the staff recommendation and then in the draft in the draft document. So, you know, certainly feel free to tell the chair if you want to discuss, but my recommendation would be to keep moving here. We did get a note from Ben Mueller from MassDOT that they would support potentially upping the budget for these studies because they do produce rapid and popular results that do tend to turn into impact projects. That would be, of course, subject to staff availability and internal resource analysis.
Okay, Len has a question.
Yeah, I was gonna let this go until you said up in the budget. So I was saving till the end. Just talking about how much money we have to spend. And what is it that we can do to get more money for these studies? If not in this cycle, then maybe other cycles through the LRTP. Is this the appropriate time to talk about that? If not, I don't want to. I know we have a limited amount of time. We can talk about it later, but I'm just dying to know. Thanks.
I mean, let's have that as a separate topic of conversation. Let's try to get through the actual studies, but you'd like to talk about is what are ideas we could have for trying to increase funding available to do more staff studies, essentially.
That, and also, what is if we can get more money for these M3s, these M's, which I support, then how much money can we get? Never mind. I could get going. I want to respect the fact that we need to move forward through these, so I'll save it. Thank you.
But let's have that as an agenda topic at a future meeting.
Okay.
Definitely.
Thank you.
We can definitely do that.
Thank you, Len. Okay, Sandy, you can keep going.
All right. M4 is the swap study that I just mentioned. You heard about this from Rachel Benson from Rentham at the last meeting. I think, what's in the description here in the universe is pretty comprehensive, and you did hear Rachel's presentation. So if anybody has any questions, feel free, and staff can respond to the best of our ability. But I think this has been covered.
Any questions on this? Okay, let's keep going.
All right. M5, congestion pricing, Tegan.
Well, I get to jump in on this one because it's certainly a very tricky topic to navigate. I want to first say that I want you to think about this in the context that one of the ways which we are trying to engage in a conversation about kind of big picture ideas that could affect transportation in the future, and particularly in the context of our scenario planning for our long range plan, is a study we're carrying out this year called the Big Idea Study. And it's involving a lot of outreach and connections with a wide range of folks in the region to discuss what those big picture items are. So this goes back to thinking about the role that congestion pricing could play in the region, sort of acknowledging that the current administration isn't really advancing the idea of congestion pricing terribly aggressively, but there's still an opportunity to look at a range of sort of how congestion pricing has been implemented and applied, and try to understand what some of those impacts would be for our region. So it would allow us to sort of continue to advance some study and understanding of it, with a caveat that we do still know that there is some level of parallel effort going on with Mass DOT, and there would need to be some more legwork before we could really figure out the place of some of this particular work in the context of those other things going on.
Okay. Are there any questions, Len?
So can we bust this up, into parts? So we do a little bit of it. Kind of figuring out, what's going to go on with the state. So maybe spend 20 or 30K. First off, get some preliminary information, and then decide whether it's worth moving on.
Yeah, so a staff person who proposed this in particular brought up that point, which is that it could be very small. It could be either staged, as you say, or planned to be small to keep the conversation going over the coming year, and sort of dive into it in a little bit more of an empirical way, looking at some of the other work. So definitely scalable in that sense and breaking it apart.
Thank you.
Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess this would certainly be different. I think this came up as a possible study 2 years ago or something, and I think it was Scott Peterson, and a much larger number was given, and I think a much more complicated type of analysis, I guess. So I guess this is scaled back, but I wasn't aware of work done at the mass thought level towards this, because it seems like this keeps getting shot down at the state level, considering that the governor sort of vetoed having like a working group for the bond bill. So I'm, certainly supportive to see what the MPO can do to kind of move this along, because it seems like it just keeps getting pushed back or kicked down the road. So thanks.
Yeah, you're right, Daniel. The intent is very different than what I think we heard about a couple of years ago, which was actually when I was a board member. And this is not technical. This is not terribly technical in the context of modeling or doing analysis. It's about trying to continue to figure out kind of the relevancies of how things have been implemented elsewhere and their potential application in our region. When I did reference the parallel MassDOT work, I think I was thinking about when we were assured 2 years ago that MassDOT was doing work that was advancing, and that it wouldn't make sense to do this work yet. So we'd have to look into what has been done at that level and try to figure out the fit.
Okay, thank you.
Len.
And then there's the element of the pandemic too, so I'm going to ask that we potentially discuss how that would fit into studying this. Because I think there's two spins on it. One is that you can say, well, we do the congestion pricing and people kind of ease into it because they're coming back gradually. It wouldn't be like such a big shock. And the other is that the politics will be, well, we're coming out of a pandemic. Why do we do this? And there are any number of other arguments, but yeah, let's think about how that fits into this. Yeah, it's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I would add, I have sort of two thoughts about this. One is that obviously this is we're not seeing a lot of congestion, and we don't know what the future of commuting is really going to look like, and how people's behavior is going to change with this incredible social experiment of so many people working from home. And so while I think that we will see a return to congestion, when that is, we don't really know, whether that's 3 years or 5 years, from now. I still think this is a policy that we should be understanding, and it's a tool. My sort of second thought is, the thing I feel like is most important, at some point, it's not fleshing out what a value capture, or I'm sorry, what a congestion pricing scheme, would look like on, some segment of highway. I think it's actually understanding, and I think this is sort of a technical kind of modeling body of work to understand, like, what is the price point that changes behavior? Because I do think that, I think that's really important. If the price point is relatively low that changes behavior, then to me that seems more doable. If the price point is quite high, that's going to be incredibly more challenging. And so before you even go down the road of, trying to flesh out what pricing, what it would look like, congestion pricing on 93 or something like that, I think doing even just some high level analysis to say, like, to change behavior would be, $5 a mile, or, some number would be really helpful. Anyway.
On that note, Eric, that is actually what we are working to do with we're calling the model roadmap, which is updating our modeling tools to be more iterative and exploratory, not explorative. So the idea is that we'll be doing more in our scenario planning for the LRTP. We'll have evolved tools that we can use in a more exploratory fashion, which allows us to test out those sensitivities much more so than sort of create one, large, very deeply defined scenario and then examining, all the aspects of that. It's more about looking at these kind of policy levers, exactly what you talked about. This is a policy tool to impact behavior. Let's look at what we think that price point might be, or where we think that sensitivity might be. So I think these things it's not necessarily linear. I think you could talk about advancing some of the interest and understanding about how these policies have been applied and how they might work here, along with our work over the coming 6 months to a couple of years as we go into the LRTP of revising our modeling tools, testing out those kinds of things, and then informing the scenario planning for the LRTP.
Okay, thank you, Tegan. Any other questions or comments about this one? Okay, seeing none. Sandy, let's continue.
All right, M6, Future of the Curve, Phase 3, Emily Domenico.
Yeah, hi. So we're currently working on Future of the Curb Phase 2, which has involved interviewing municipal planners throughout the region about curb space and their challenges and what they need to plan curb space better. There's been an expressed need to have curb usage and curb capacity metrics that match the type of municipality planners are in that are more local to the Boston MPO region. And this study would lead to a method to estimate curb space usage using data from our municipalities in areas where different curb management strategies have been implemented. So it would be continuing the effort to have a more regional guidance on curb space management and have a starting point for these metrics that we could then return to in the future and update as curb use changes.
Emily, thank you. Any questions about this? I will just make a plug that, MAPC, we did a report focused on sort of the impacts of e-commerce regionally. And one of our recommendations is to really get our arms around how do we manage, that curb space in the future and the competition for it, particularly in urban areas. And I know in Boston, I know this is a hot topic, there. So Emily, thank you very much. So Len, do you have a question?
Yeah, I like to study a lot, and I would ask about the cost, but I know Sandy's just going to tell me it's a rough estimate, so I hope it's on the high side. Thank you.
Sandy?
It is an estimate.
It's an estimate. Okay. Let's keep going.
All right. M7, Mark, if you want to speak to this very briefly, great. But this is something that could be covered under one of the recurring studies or wrapped into the other Blue Hills study that we have later in the universe.
Yeah, looking at that section of Blue Hills studies, I mean, it doesn't seem like it would fall under one of our typical corridor studies we're doing because there's not a lot of activity along that section of roadway from Chickatawba to 95. There's obviously through commuter traffic, but since it's both the land use on either side of that section of the roadway is the protected parklands of the Blue Hills, that there's not a lot of other activities. So I think one of the main focuses that they wanted to look at was trying to increase the safety of their trail crossings in the area and also probably improve bicycle and pedestrian amenities along the corridor. So I think it's something we could handle under our technical assistance program a little better, since it's not really a complicated corridor where we have to look at different things and analyze different things. So I think we would better off covering it there, and then kind of providing the outcomes that they would like.
Oh, that's great. So we could kick that to our technical assistance program potentially?
Yeah, this fall.
Okay, great. Steve Olenoff.
Yeah, so I've been involved with the Blue Hills for many years. I hikes there, so I can just tell you that on the Blue Hills Reservation, the thing is it's bisected and cut into so many pieces by these roadways, the highways and the roadways. This is one of them. Route 138 is another where they're going to have a project where they're going to put in crosswalks and signals, pedestrian signals, so people can get across the roadway. This is an area where major trails cross, and it's like really difficult to get across it. And it's been that way for a very long time, and traffic just seems to get faster and heavier. So that's why this is being presented here, to try to see what we can do to make it safely so you can use the reservation.
Yeah, and that's what we try to provide them in our technical assistance, with the same type of treatments that are being proposed at along 138 section.
Good. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mark. Okay, let's keep going.
All right, M8. I believe Marty Milkovich was going to speak to this one, but I don't see him here. So if Mark or someone else.
I will try to do my best, like I said. The intent of this study is to look at some work zone impacts. As you know, lately, or that the typical work zones are taking longer and longer. They're no longer, 6 months to a year type of thing. That we're seeing, sometimes 2 or 3 year disruptions due to construction projects. So what we'd like to do with this is kind of investigate methodologies of examining and better evaluating these work zones to for when future work zones come up in the future, that we can be able to evaluate and sell to inform people what some of the impacts will be of a work zone. Typically, who's it affecting? Is it just vehicles? Is it affecting bicyclists and pedestrians as well? And what type of accommodations can be made to alleviate that? And also trying to develop some metrics to better evaluate these work zone impacts.
Okay, thank you. Any questions about this one? Steve, do you have a question, or were you, no, your hand, residual raised hand. Okay, thank you, Mark. So not seeing any, we can go on to the next one.
All right. T1, Blake Acton.
Hi, thank you, Sandy. My name is Blake Acton. I'm a transit planner and analyst at the MPO. I'll do a quick 1-minute background on the bus rapid transit study. So bus rapid transit, also known as a BRT, it promises like a rail-like quality service, but with substantially lower costs per mile. And as a result, BRT has become really popular way to expand transit service around the US over the past decade or so. However, comprehensive full bus rapid transit systems are still quite rare in the Boston region. But BRT has the potential to greatly expand access and quality of life for transit-dependent people, and can fill a critical gap between rail and bus service by expanding the frequent and reliable service beyond the current rail network. This study would identify potential corridors for future BRT and evaluate feasibility and estimate accessibility improvements to jobs and services. The final report would conclude with a handful of feasible corridors with the greatest potential benefit. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Blake, thank you. My understanding is that the MBTA is still, I think, reviewing this and giving us some feedback. So I don't think we have formal sort of thoughts from them, but obviously they're doing a lot of work looking at these corridors. So it would be, kind of great to know what they've done and how this work could like potentially complement that. Daniel.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I agree with what you just said. And my question is about whether we're talking about like, I don't know, BRT, like full on BRT, as opposed to some of the bus priority type bus lanes work that was done, say, a couple of years ago. One of the bus lanes in Arlington, and it wasn't full BRT pilot, but it had incorporated a number of different elements. I think there's some skepticism about the ability to construct sort of full scale BRT. We just approved funding for a big project on Columbus Ave in Boston last week that, to me, would be like much closer to BRT than, as far as I know, anything. Well, maybe the Silver Line, some aspects of the Silver Line, right? So, just wondering if the intent is to have something that is a much more full scale BRT is what you'd be looking at.
Can you speak to that, Blake?
That would be our intent, would be to look at more full scale BRT. Around the region, there's been a lot of like BRT elements sort of implemented separately in different places. And so we want to sort of imagine putting all those elements together in a longer corridor and really see if that's possible. And also what would the benefits be of putting all that together into actual full BRT.
I expect the ITDP has put some thought into this as well, so they would be a good partner to look to.
Any other questions about this one? Okay, great. Thank you, Blake. Let's go on to T2, I think.
All right, so T2 is the study for access to the Blue Hills that was proposed by a coalition of community groups. They spoke to it at the last meeting on the 25th. If anybody has any remaining questions, staff can do our best to answer. I know we do have some internal excitement about this from several staff members as well.
Sandy, my question, this is particularly focused on a public transit connection, not a bicycle connection?
Yeah, I mean, it could potentially look at both. The concepts are still malleable at this point, and certainly we could expand the scope if the committee has interest in that.
Okay, Steve Olenoff.
Yeah, so I could talk about this all day, but real quickly, I mean, this is a 7,000 acre reservation. It's really the largest area in a wild state in any metropolitan area in the country. Now, back in the real old days when, you know, they had the trolleys coming out of Boston, anyone in Boston can get there just hopping on the trolley and they would just come down there. The trolleys are long gone. And whatever buses replace them, they're pretty much gone, is practically non-existent. So, and the things that are in the Blue Hills Reservation, that list just starts. I can add a lot of things to that list, but I think the thing we have to realize is this is a true equity project. Usually we say, hey, this is an equity. You know, it's located, some project is located in an environmental justice area, therefore it's an equity project. Well, it may or may not be that. Here's a case where it really affects everyone in the inner city to get out to the Blue Hills Reservation, which they can't now. And I can tell you, as you know, hiking through there for years and years, there's a total lack of diversity, you know, on all usage in the Blue Hills, except for the Houghton's Pond area, where a lot of inner city people come out to swim in the summer, but only if they have an automobile. So just all these activities, this is really a different kind of project here, just to get some kind of bus system, what kind of buses it is, but just get public transportation so people can actually get down to the Blue Hills Reservation.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I would add a +1 to that. And obviously this is an idea that could then be, you know, teed up for potential implementation through community connections. I always like the things that we can kind of study and then they can be implemented, you know, for, you know, through the TIP programs. So Tom Kadzis.
Yeah, Steve had some really powerful comments there. Just one comment, from what I'm reading, I think we could pull this off for less than 80,000. I could be wrong about that, but I think that we could make some significant strides for less than that, I would imagine. Because why I'm saying that, it seems somewhat focused. If you're looking at existing routes, that's what you're looking at. I'm not too sure why it would be 80,000 if what it comes down to is new routes. I'm probably wrong about that, but thanks for the comment. Thanks for allowing me to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say you're not wrong. It's a question of scalability, right? Like,
okay,
depending on what's available, this study could take any number of different forms. It could be very strictly a service planning study that looks at the existing bus routes and how to improve them. It could be something that incorporates walk and cycle access. It could be something that really focuses on community engagement and getting perspectives from a qualitative perspective on how people need access to the Blue Hills. So
thanks, Andy. That does a lot to clarify. With that in mind, I'd say it's a I don't know. It looks like there might be something we could, depending upon what our budget situation is, with those options, Sandy. Maybe there's something that we could pull off. Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Tom. Len.
Look, I hear you with the equity issue, you know, but just keep in mind that not everyone likes hiking. You know, I know those who hike, you know, think that if only people could go hiking, they want to go hiking. Just like not everyone wants to go to the beach, you know, they can get to the beach, you know. So just keep in mind that it might be appealing to a type of person, you know, who likes to hike, you know, but I hope it can come in for less. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. Okay. Any other questions or comments about this one? Okay, seeing none, let's go on to T3.
All right, Paul, did you want to speak to this? Or do you want me to?
Sorry, I'm muting. You can go ahead.
All right. So this would be I think I mentioned this before, but it would be a small budget line that staff would use to track the various microtransit projects going on around the Commonwealth and potentially a little bit beyond, kind of in the the extended Boston area and evaluate them relative to various factors of success, trying to establish relationship to land use where microtransit can be helpful since this is a new service paradigm and technology. And it would be something that would run at a small budget for several years while these various pilot programs and new services kind of play out and see how they do.
Any questions about this one? Tom, do you have a question? No.
Sorry, residual.
Okay. Okay, not seeing any questions. Let's keep going.
All right. T4 is the bus electrification study that we heard from Matthew Peterson, among others, about in the last meeting. Don't want to repeat too much, but if anybody has any residual questions.
Any questions here? Again, we did hear from the T that they are, reviewing all the ones that are under their, that are about MBTA issues. So we'll get some feedback on that and we can discuss further.
All right, I'd like to hand it over to Paul for T5 and T6.
Sure, thanks, Andy. So for T5, Advanced Parking Management Systems, study for MBTA parking lots, we have chatted with the MBTA a little bit about this, but they did have some interest in looking into various types of payment and better methods. Some of the things they mentioned to us is, coordination with municipally owned lots and sort of a seamless product at all of their lots to access stations, and possibly bundling fare and parking. So they are also interested in a summary of possible things that have worked elsewhere, which is also a part of this. So we still have some more collaboration and coordination to do with them, but there definitely was some interest, particularly with the regional rail operating model that they're starting to think about now.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Any questions about this one? Okay, seeing none, let's go on to, what is it, T6?
Yes, T6, I can talk about that one as well, which is a fare policy post-COVID to address flexible telecommuting. This study would research fare policy ideas for the MBTA and RTAs, look at different ideas that are happening around the country and in the world that folks are now trying with our sort of our new normal as we come back and think about how people might commute and may not be commuting 5 days a week, may have less interest in, buying a monthly pass every month. And so there's a lot of ideas out there that I know the T is thinking about some and it's started trying to pilot some as well. So we collaborate with them and think about how we can support the T and our regional transit authorities in that.
Any questions about that one? Okay, thank you, Paul. Seeing none, let's go on to T7.
All right, Brian Kane, this was you. And then Paul, if you want to speak to this one also, if you had anything to say about it from your group's perspective.
Great, thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Eric. So the genesis of this study is the incredible inefficiency that we have in the region around how we do paratransit operations. There's 7 RTAs within the Boston MPO district plus the T. If you get on a paratransit vehicle in any one of those RTAs, you have to switch, and you want to get into downtown Boston, you switch to the T. You have to stop, go down the lift, go up another lift and go onto another vehicle, pay another fare. Incredibly inefficient, incredibly expensive. And really, it's a 2-seat ride for folks that really could be a 1-seat ride. So the study looks to build on the coordinated public transit human services transportation plan that was referenced earlier, to see how we can begin implementing it in the Boston region. There is work being done at the state level around doing this outside of the Boston region. This study would really focus on the Boston region, which is where the savings, not only in terms of operating dollars for the T and the RTAs could be leveraged, but also where most of the rides in the state happen and where the sort of improvement to people using the paratransit services daily lives could be improved. And it would focus on, like I described, the action at the borders. So where those transfers take place. And I think it would look at things like, what if we just allowed BAT to sort of take a customer all the way into Boston on one of their vehicles? How would that work? How would it get paid for? How would it all happen? It's really a high level 50,000 foot study looking at ways to improve the transportation of human service, folks that need human service transportation. I'm sure someone else can say this more eloquently than me, but I think this is badly needed and would actually be a study that would get picked up and implemented really quickly. Thank you.
Len Diggins.
No, I really think this one is a big equity issue, especially with respect to elderly. And I think one of the things we might want to factor into this too is how if we give people a one-seat ride, into Boston using paratransit services, it may even make buses work better. And like with respect to staying on time and things like that. So I know it's a touchy little issue, but it is something that really affects the real world and how buses work. And so I add that as a suggestion. It's something you might want to consider in the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. Daniel.
Thanks, Eric. I guess a couple of questions that come to mind for me, and you don't need to respond now, but maybe they would be incorporated in the study is how often this happens, these transfers occur. I don't really have any sense of that. And then what would be the impact of if, what we're talking about, one seat ride from one region to the next, how does that affect the availability of those vehicles for the region that it's really meant to be for? So that's more curious questions about those kinds of issues. Thanks.
So Daniel, yeah, I mean, I don't have the data in front of me, but the transfers happen every single day. Go out to Riverside and watch Metro West folks come in and transfer to the ride to go into Boston. It would be a paradigm shift for both the T and RTAs in terms of making more vehicles available locally, because those vehicles that are going into Boston, the way that the rides could get bundled together and sort of combined, would make more local trips possible, I believe. I mean, I don't have the data in front of me, like I said, but I think this would allow the ride paratransit to get back to its core mission of providing local trips and figuring out a better way, sort of more of a statewide, region-wide way to get folks in and out of the hospital areas in Boston, where I think a lot of trips are taking. But that's for the study to sort of figure out. So hope that helps.
Thank you, Brian. I know we're at 1:30, but I would propose that we just keep going and try to get through this. I know there's a few more. What do you think of that, Sandy?
Yeah, that's what I would suggest, rather than trying to edge into the next meeting. We did say that this meeting would be 90 minutes. So.
Okay. So thank you, Brian. I think, Brian, the next one you also have proposed too. Do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, I did. Really, really quick. This is a literature review of why the heck it costs so damn much to build transit projects in Boston. I think we've all experienced the frustration seeing the projected cost of things like East-West Rail and the Alston Station, and even TIP project cost growth over the years. It's something that really prevents the T from doing a lot of projects. Is incredibly frustrating to advocates, and municipalities certainly suffer from it. So what we're looking to do is, a narrow focused literature review, comparing costs to do transit projects in North America and the rest of the world. We've all heard of the Madrid Spanish system, where they can build transit stations for 2/3 of the cost. And this is really starting to put CTPS staff and the MPO on a track of figuring out not only why, but how we can begin to implement some of those changes in the future. And I think it's incredibly expandable over the course of the next few years, not just on T projects, but to all the projects that the MPO looks at, including all of our TIP projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions about this one?
Oh, well, that was a nice, I'm sorry, I couldn't get my hand up. That's a nice little hook into the MPO, Brian, because I was going to say, like, why doesn't he do this? You know?
There's no incentive to, Len.
Well,
They don't, there's no reason for them to look around and say, well, they do it this way in Barcelona, so why don't we? They just say, oh, it's going to cost X, and we can't do it.
yeah, okay. All right. Okay. So, well, okay, fine. That's it. Thanks.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, it's okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Len. Tegan.
I just wanted to add, I mean, I think what you talked about there, Brian, is what we also added as a note, and something that occurred to me is that I don't think this is a transit only issue, right? This really is an issue that's probably beyond the MBTA, and like you said, affects many of the TIP projects. And so that was just something I wanted to focus on here, is it doesn't, something like this wouldn't have to be transit focused per se to get at some of those questions that you have, but that might make it a bigger effort as well.
Okay, thank you. Tom Kadzis.
Tegan, right on. And as far as the MBTA construction costs, yeah, I think it's a good work program. I've said before that, in my opinion, the cost of MPO projects, no matter what they are similar to me explaining why healthcare costs what it does. I'm not criticizing anybody. I just don't really understand why construction costs for transportation are magnitudes ahead of the consumer price index for the Boston region. And we've had good input from practitioners like colleague Tom Bent, who explained that, like right now, lumber's through the roof, all this stuff is expensive. I still have no idea why transportation projects cost what they do and why they're 10 times an increase to the consumer price index. I'm exaggerating, but thanks for letting me get up on the soapbox on that one.
Thanks, Tom. Tom Bent.
Well, since Tom mentioned it, I mean, one of the, in some of the different areas, I know labor costs in the Northeast, especially in the Boston area, is one of the highest in the country. So that's a piece of it. Second is traffic control. It's amazing the cost of having police details and things like that for like the Green Line project. It's astronomical. And then the third thing is the environmental piece of it all, the environmental regulations and things that are all impacted on all these different projects. And, especially if you're in the inner core, you had usages that were here 150 years ago that contaminated soil, and it's fine until you start digging, So I know there's a project right up the street from my office right now where it's costing them to build a building there an additional almost $2 million because of when they dug down 20 feet, they found all kinds of problems down there. So that's and I'm sure Tom knows this with projects in Boston and things like that. But I think that's all a part of all this. And I know years ago, I thought the MPO did some kind of study a long time ago on cost overall and why they were there and whether or not it's worth going back to take a look at that. But I think it's a good thing to do, but I know some of those are like fixed things that we can't change. I know Governor Patrick tried to bring in flagmen. Do you ever see any flagmen anywhere? So it's things like that add to a lot of costs.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for that.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Let's keep going, Sandy.
Great. So I think we're going to jump ahead to number E2 because Betsy has another meeting to go to.
Okay.
That's measuring inequities and transportation impacts in the Boston region. And then we'll get back to our regular order.
Great. Thank you, Sandy and Eric. Thanks for letting me jump ahead. So this study, it would look fundamentally at the current existing inequities in our transportation system in the Boston region for both transit and and roadway. And so we do, if you've been following along, MP board members will be familiar with our metrics that we look at in the long range plan, for example. We've done a lot of work looking into the future of what are kind of the impacts that we expect to see if we program a certain set of projects with regards to emissions or travel time or access to different opportunities. And what this study would do would be to bring that kind of to that sort of work to today, right? What inequities pertaining to those sorts of metrics do we see among different demographic populations? And also how might that differ between different types of municipalities or different locations within our region? And this would be a work that would contain both a public outreach component and trying to understand what are people experiencing, and then also quantitative. Okay, so based on some of the feedback and other information we already know, analyzing and quantifying those inequities so that when we are doing equity analyses for the TIP or for the long range plan, we can better say, like, this is how much we're improving things by versus, or we think we'll improve things by versus the baseline. And so the timing would be really good too, because a long range plan is coming up, and so this would feed very much into the needs assessment that we do the year or two before the long range plan is approved. So that's pretty much it. I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, do folks have questions on this? I'd like to make a plug for it. I feel like this is such a critical topic right now of that actually having some sort of data behind where our most critical kind of equity needs and for transportation would be really interesting. So I'd make a plug for this one. Tom, did you want to comment? Tom Kadzis? No.
No, I'm sort of moving around. I got to try to move the bag. The sitting so much is killing my back. One question? No, I agree, Eric. I think it's crucial. I think it's important, especially with what we've been doing. But question is, how does this relate to what we're doing in terms of what we're trying to? We're trying to improve our equity scores, and this is something different.
Yeah, so this would kind of set the baseline so that we know where we're starting from. So when we say we're improving, we can quantify much better kind of how much a particular set of projects or project would improve equity. If we know where we're starting from, we can better assess how we're doing and any changes we might want to make policy-wise or otherwise to help us get there, and help us also inform like the kind of should our goals be equity-wise. If we see that, for example, like there's, travel time is a really big issue. Maybe that's something when we go back to the goals and objectives for the long range plan, we say, okay, maybe we need to focus in on that more. So it really helps us kind of know where we're at so we can do a better job if we need to going forward in terms of addressing equity concerns.
Thanks for the explanation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Len Diggins.
Yes. So actually, this is going to be an interesting study, especially because of the qualitative data that you're going to get from populations. So I imagine your N, as in the number of people that you're going to have to talk to, is going to have to be quite large, because in order to establish a baseline and then to compare it later on, you're not probably going to be able to go to the same people, which to me makes me think that your N is going to have to be even larger to kind of capture, the fact that you don't have a real control, for your baseline versus what happens later on. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be something we have to think about. And certainly I'll be talking with Kate and others on staff and how we can kind of use public engagement in a way that is effective, knowing that we can't interview everybody in the region, but kind of what could a representative sample look like, or how do we go about it so that it gives us the information we need. So it's going to definitely take some thought, and I'm happy to get any further feedback from folks if you have ideas of how we can kind of make it effective.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Len. Steve Olenoff.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but This sounds like something should have been done years ago.
I don't disagree with you necessarily, Steve. And we, have only so many person hours and lots of work at the MPO. But the sooner we can do it, the better, for sure.
Okay, any other questions about this one? Great, seeing none. Sandy, back to you.
All right, so I think we were at T9 and T10. Those were both ones that were discussed last week. I would propose that we skip over them unless anybody has any urgent questions, especially since we did discuss T10 earlier.
Yeah, I would agree. That sounds good.
All right. E1, I think Stephen Andrews just signed on.
Yes, hello. So this project is called the Transportation User Costs Over Time is what we've called it. The idea is the MBTA
Stephen, we're losing you. I think we lost him.
Oh no.
One of his kids ate the cable. So
Yeah.
just tell him I said that.
Paul, can you fill in for Stephen while we're missing him? Is Paul still here?
I'm going to go to a different room.
There he is. Okay.
Yeah, Stephen, your connection is not that great, but maybe if you go to a different place.
But yeah, if we can give Stephen 30 more seconds, otherwise I can try to give some quick background. But
sure.
Okay, yeah, Stephen, there you go.
Thanks, Lenny, for the joke about my kids there. I did hear that. It was the last thing I heard. I just had to go to their room.
Okay.
So when the T is required to do fare increases, they're required to make sure that the changes within their fare structure is equitable. And a lot of times that leads to things like the MBTA raises fares, and CTPS, MBTA publishes us a report that says we've created an equitable outcome. And we get transit advocates, the general public. There's kind of a disconnect between that lived experience and what the MBTA is saying. And I think some of that is just because they see the MBTA fares are increasing, but they don't necessarily see the government fees associated with driving or the other modes they have increasing at the same rate as transit prices. So what this project would do would look at kind of instead of just looking at MBTA fares or RTA fares, it would look at how the cost to make trips has changed for different groups of people over time, with a specific eye on equity and making sure that evaluating how those relationships have changed over the last while. I'd love to take questions, thoughts on that.
So Andrew, so Stephen, just to understand, you'd be looking at you'd be looking at what is the cost of somebody who's really dependent on the MBTA bus system? Like what is the fare? What are the fare increases meant for them versus somebody who's driving for most of their trips, and what is the cost of potentially increase in gas prices or whatever, how's that impacted that? Is that kind of what you would be looking at?
So I'm kind of like in general, yes, I'm kind of focused on kind of that government subsidy portion of it, or the government fee portion of it, where gas prices are affected by all number of things in the world, but the government has a choice on how much of that they levy in taxes and levy in fees for your license, and all these fees that the government, we say you should pay to be able to travel. So this would kind of try to put these things on more equal footing, comparing the rapid transit, the fare to travel,
perhaps coupled with other aspects of that, and compare that to what's been happening for other modes.
Okay, thank you. Daniel.
Thanks. Yeah, so I guess what comes to mind for this is, or maybe this is clarifying a little bit, is when I've heard comparisons made of like, the number of times that the MBTA fares have increased over time versus the I guess like the federal gas tax, hasn't changed in 30 years, or the state gas tax, and sort of I guess I don't know what you call it. There's sort of the real value or the real monetary cost of different things that they've increased for bus riders, but they haven't really increased for drivers. I mean, is that the sort of thing you're getting at?
Yes, yeah, that's in the same, it's right in the right vein.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Okay, any other questions on this one? Seeing none, let's keep going.
All right, R1, CTPS Resilience Program, Anne or Ariel?
I'll take that one. So this is a pilot creating a new ongoing program to address resiliency in our region. The MPO is required by federal guidelines to address resiliency in transportation planning and programming. And we started our resiliency work as part of the last two long-range transportation plans. And over the last few years, we've been coordinating with state and regional agencies and municipalities on their work on resiliency. And it included inventorying the municipal vulnerability plans in the region. And we've done that as part of our needs assessment. But over the past year, we've been meeting with MAPC's South Shore Coalition, who is interested in looking at a regional approach to resiliency of the transportation system in their communities, and they are interested in our participation. We also met with the Intercorps Committee yesterday, and they are also interested in a regional approach to resiliency, specifically working with the regional agencies on inland and coastal flooding. In addition, we met with the Resilient Mystic Collaborative Organization, which includes communities north of Boston, and they are also interested in our participation on their work. So this program would provide funding to continue coordination with municipalities and state and regional agencies. It will allow staff to participate in regional efforts and identify areas that may require additional studies that we could do through the UPWP, any assistance that we could provide through our technical assistant programs and projects that could potentially funded in the TIP. So creation of this new program will allow for coordination meetings with stakeholders, participation in regional planning efforts, and then at the end of the year, we would include a presentation to the MPO to report on the pilot program. Any questions?
Len Diggins.
Here's a wild idea, perhaps. Do you think you might be able to fold the work zone study into this? Because, I mean, they kind of happen sporadically and somewhat haphazardly. I mean, and I know that part of that was to kind of figure out the impacts of those and maybe how to mitigate those. Do you think that could be part of this too?
I'm not really sure about.
Yeah, I mean, I said it's wild. He's just kind of trying to think of how to maybe get, just get a lot of result from the same work output. Sorry, I'm losing whatever coherence I had. Sorry about that. I'll maybe talk about it later with you.
Mark Evick, please.
To say something that, Len, your idea of combining the two might work more for the next study we're going to be looking at. Would probably be more in line with that one, that we could combine the two.
Well,
I was thinking all three. Sorry.
Why don't we go to that one, Mark?
Okay, that one is talking about network resilience, where we try to look at taking our regional demand model and using that, and also some mapping and input from what Anna just said about using different flood mapping or coastal flood mapping, identifying what roadways in our region are susceptible to climate change, and then seeing what happens if you lose one of those roadways and the impacts associated with that type of thing. It would probably go more in line with some of the work zone work, kind of identify the same things that would happen if you using different metrics to evaluate the impacts of it. So it's a thought that those two might be somewhat combined. But this would be looking at the what major roadways in our region, if impacted by climate change, and what would the results be of that? So, where would our focus be on trying to improve those roadways or facilities in the future?
Mark, thank you. Honestly, I should know the answer to this because we do at MAPC, we do a lot of support for climate resilience too. But is there any entity in the state that actually does this kind of work that says, okay, if sea level rises or storms are like X, this is what roads or other public infrastructure is going to be impacted? It seems like that's a really important thing to do.
Yeah, the work's just beginning, Eric, because I know MassDOT is working on both the coastal flooding mapping and modeling, and also they're working towards an inland mapping model. So I think once those are done, there'll probably be more work associated with that, identifying key roadways that would be associated with those type of climate change impacts. But I mean, you can look at other climate change impacts too. I know one group mentioned, just regular rainfall flooding on certain low-lying roadways that are impacted now without climate change, so to speak, and and what happens to those roadways, and how do you make the improvements to those roadways. So I think it's an evolving process, and probably has some more information on the group she's been coordinating with the different state groups on that.
And Ariel and other people in CTPS have been working on an update to our all hazards planning tool, which is an interactive tool that lives on the website that will hopefully provide a basis for doing some of this work going forward. And that's a 2021 UPWP project.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. Any other questions for Mark or for Ann? Why don't we keep going then?
All right, well, we're basically done. 01 staff-generated research and technical assistance is a recurring study. We do put a small amount of money toward this every year. Happy to take any questions, but this is something that's been very successful. It's generated a bunch of interesting staff research. Been doing it about 6-7 years now, I think.
Right. Any questions about this one? It's pretty straightforward. So Sandy, can you talk about next steps now, and particularly what is the overall, Len mentioned this, we might have what, $200,000 to $300,000 of available funds, and what's the request?
Yeah, so we will be quantifying that at the staff level before the next meeting. The next step is I will send a survey out two surveys, one to staff and one to the committee. I will hopefully do that beginning of next week, and you'll have about a week to 10 days to fill it out, asking everyone to rank the studies in order of preference, minus the recurring studies. Once everyone has filled out those studies, staff will meet internally and take the results of the committee survey and the staff survey into consideration in developing the staff recommended list of studies, at which point we hope we will also have a firmer grasp of how much money is available, because there's a lot of moving parts to that based on different assumptions about revenue and whether some of these tasks can get folded into other things that are funded from other lines. We don't really know. We can't give an answer at this point about how much money overall is available. And the target date for the next UPWP committee meeting, which we would come back and report on all of that, is May 6th, before the MPO meeting. And at that point, we would bring back a staff recommended list of studies with firmer budget estimates, firmer budget estimates, and an attempt at accounting how much money is available, and also results of the UPWP committee survey, so that you'll be able to see how other committee members ranked studies.
And then when would we be looking to actually make a recommendation to the full MPO?
So the studies would then get written up once the committee approves a list, which could be just the staff recommended list, or it could be something else at the committee's discretion. And we're still working on the exact target dates, but the studies will be kind of integrated into the overall draft UPWP document, which we would presumably be putting out for public comment late May, June, potentially very early July, depending on what the actual drop dead date for endorsement is.
So at the May 6th meeting, you're really looking for the committee to come to a recommendation. Is that correct?
Basically, yeah. And if we don't have a firm grasp on the budget yet, it can take the form of, we've ranked the top 10 studies and we'll draw a cutoff after 8, if that's how many we've got money to fund. There's also the question of scalability, but maybe Annette, I know Tegan had to leave, but maybe Annette can speak a little bit to how confident we are about being able to have a budget estimate at that meeting.
Not really sure. We should have a budget estimate, I think, by mid-June, hopefully a little bit sooner than that.
Okay.
So, like a good budget estimate. We'll have a draft before then.
Well, I would say let's make sure that UPWP committee members know that the May 6th meeting is an important meeting where we're looking to try to come to consensus on a recommendation. And we should obviously budget, a fair amount of time to have that conversation. My feeling is meeting after the MPO meeting might be better, because we meet at 9, we barely have an hour to have a conversation. I know we had decent participation today, but that's something we might want to consider.
Yeah.
I don't know what others think.
We can definitely check in with the chair, with Ben Mueller, and I can send an email around to members asking for people's availability after the meeting on the 6th.
Yeah. Len?
So along the lines of having, the UPWP meeting after the MPO meeting, if there's not another committee meeting before that, and I hope there isn't, would it be possible for the MPO board meeting to start at 9 and around 11:30, and then we hook into this one? And so just put it out, there's a possibility.
Yeah, that might be more challenging, but yeah.
Okay. Right, gotcha. I hear you.
And then the other thing I would say, Sandy, is in the past, sometimes we haven't had the greatest participation in members responding to the survey. So for everyone still in the meeting here, please respond to the survey, and we'll send some reminders out.
It's gotten a lot better the last couple of years. I think I've gotten firmer in my reminder emails.
Yeah. Okay.
We might send phone calls to you.
Yeah, no, please do. Anything else on this topic here? Okay. So seeing that, the last thing on the agenda are members' items. Are there any members' items? No members' items. Okay, we just talked about next meeting. Sorry, I jumped out of order. So that being said, I think we're done. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
To adjourn.
Motion.
Okay, Len made it and Tom seconded it. So without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. This is a long meeting, but really appreciate all of the really good input. So we'll talk more on May 6th. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Take guys.